brief. Yesterday, we identified, at the end of the evening, we identified from all the conversations that we had on Monday and Tuesday, these several areas of interest that we thought we might want to take a look at based on the conversations we had. Today, we got off to a slow start because we were in Holyoke. We were in Holyoke on our way to look at the Churchill project, which is the Section 8 urbanist project in Holyoke. And about 3 minutes from there, we were in a traffic accident. And nobody hurt in either our car or the other one, but we had to swap cars out, and we lost about 3 hours this morning, so we got a late start. But what we've done, what's been done since this afternoon is that the students have looked at started to look at three different areas that represent a different set of conditions. Each one represents a different set of conditions, but all three of them to some extent, address conditions that are common to at least some of the other areas in the site. So, within the context of Northampton. So the three areas that they have begun looking at include the area around Main Street, the area along Pleasant Street here, and the intersection of the main streets in downtown Florence. And there are a number of other things that we are definitely going to be looking at. Like we did not look today at all at Village Hill, and we do intend to take a look at that. We did not look at King Street. We intend to take a look at that. And some of the other issues having to do with affordable housing to some extent, we begin to address in the things that we looked at this evening. So these three areas, downtown, Pleasant Street, and Florence. And students are going to present the work. We invite your critique of the work. It will result in our rethinking the work that we did last night. It will also inform the work that we go on to do when we start looking at these other areas, either later this week or when we go back to South Bend. We're still trying to get our heads around Northampton. With that, I will turn it over to the students and invite them to explain your work.
My name is John Checker.
And I'm David Reed.
And the first area that we're going to look at tonight is the Pleasant Street corridor, basically from the river all the way up to Main Street. Just to get you a little acclimated, Main Street is right along here. This is the intersection with Main Street, Pleasant Street, King Street, then shoots up, and then Bridge Street comes out from that. So we took a look from Main Street all the way down to the river, and initially, looking from the figure ground diagram, we tried to figure out areas that had potential for centers, I guess. And there's one obvious one, which is the area at the intersection of Main Street, Bridge Street, King Street, all that. That's really well done, so we didn't spend too much time or any time at that one. It's pretty much well developed, consistent with the principles that we're looking at with traditional neighborhood design and things like that. So we kind of work our way down towards the river. And the first area that caught our eye was the area where the proposed bike path is going to be going across Pleasant Street, which is where the old interurban rail line used to go, right next to the train station, and curve around and then head back behind Main Street all the way out and then out to the Mill River. So that's one interesting area. And of course the train station and some of the other buildings back in that area. It's a large parking lot, so there's a lot of potential we feel for that area to look at. And also across the street from that, there's not a whole lot along the street face. The street frontage, it's all kind of broken up. It's lots of gaps in between there. So we feel that could be a pretty neat opportunity for that one. Working down the Pleasant Street, again, it starts to kind of become a little bit more dense along the street edge, and then when you get to the intersection of Pleasant and
Oakenham?
Thank you very much. That seems like a pretty interesting area to look at the development along there. Just how you can organize it in such a way to create more of a historic core there. And then further south, the intersection of Pleasant and Cons Road that comes in, they kind of converge in a V shape, which makes for a little, I'm sure, traffic troubles down there, and for some options. Again, a large expanse and gaps in the street and things like that. And just historically, we came across, just initially looking at this type of stuff, some of the streets, some of the buildings are at different angles, and we were kind of like trying to figure out what was going on. And I think Dan can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, as Josh said, basically everything that's south of Hockenham Street, the side streets that come off of it are actually perpendicular to Cons, but they intersect pleasant, oblique angles, which we thought was kind of strange. And looking at an 1873 map that we had of Northampton, we came to discover that Pleasant Street actually traveled down the Hockenham Road corridor originally and followed the path of the original Mill River, and then at some point later on they apparently extended Pleasant Street directly south, and this became incidental to it. But we thought that was really interesting, and it really helped to explain also why these buildings here at the intersection of Hockenham and Pleasant are basically arranged in such a way that you can see where the continuity is between those two streets, where it was originally.
Yeah, and when laying out, just designing things, it's really hard to design around sharp angles, which we were kind of trying to avoid there, and you couldn't. It was impossible to avoid that. So the next thing we looked at was we tried to figure out the road system. Just get a little bit of the history there. And the next area that we looked at was just looking at parcels that would be interesting for development, and not necessarily development, but could be better, basically, is what we're looking at. And again, the area that I mentioned earlier, behind the train station with the large parking lot, and then across the street, that area there. But then a couple, I guess, gaps in the street along Pleasant Street. And then the further south you got, the more it really became larger buildings parking in front, which again is the result of them extending Pleasant Street down. And the way the buildings are arranged in this area is more typical of the suburban sprawl, where you have parking in the front, buildings pulled off the street. There's not a coherent line of building face basically along the street, because this road was put in after the traditional way of laying out streets and everything. So the orange are pretty neat potential areas, I guess, as far as like property lines and things like that go. And then another thing that we ran into was, or not ran into, but discovered was, which was a pleasant surprise, was that the old Mill River still is exposed in the midpoint of this whole block here. So along Pleasant Street you have buildings, and then along Con Street you have buildings, but in between there's actually potential opportunity for natural resource type of activity, walking trails and different things like that. And one of the interesting things that we noticed was someone in our meetings had talked about access down to the river, to the Connecticut River, and we thought a great way to possibly get down there via the bike would be to tie right into this bike lane that's actually coming down through here, and have a spur off that runs down along the old Mill River, then across the street, and then out
on Hockenham
Road, which takes you straight out almost all the way down to the river. So we thought that was an interesting tie-in right through there. And we're going to try to explore some ways that the building and stuff can go along.
I think that's probably the biggest, I don't want to obstacle, or at least challenge, let's say, put it that way, are the buildings that, where that potential connection might be made. There's some buildings there, and we're not exactly sure how to, but
yeah,
that's kind of what we're,
make a nice long area.
A first attempt.
So from there, our first iteration. On this plan, which might be hard to see from where you are, so at the end, definitely make sure you come up and take a look at it up closer. The black buildings or the grayish buildings are all existing buildings the way they are now. And the orangish, brownish buildings are potential infill buildings to try to create the higher density that you want along the street, to make it a nice pedestrian street, and also possibly to boost the economic value of this area along here. And so, again, one of the areas, I guess in the south that we took a look at was how to tie in Cons Road to Pleasant. One idea that we came up with was just to bring Cons Road down and then tee into Pleasant Avenue, which is one solution. And I think later, some other proposals have been put a circle around about.
Actually, I don't know if that was pointed out, but for each one of the areas we looked at, there are two options that we have tonight. So just to reiterate that in case that was already mentioned.
Yeah, we all worked on at least two of these, basically. So it'll be presented the first option, and then at least the second option, possibly more. And they're very quick and down and dirty, and so just kind of bear with us, I guess, as far as that goes. We're just trying to raise the issues as much as we can and get feedback from you guys, and we'll continue to develop these schemes throughout not only this week but also this semester. And as Phil mentioned before, these are just three little areas that we're taking a look at. There are plenty of other areas that we're going to deal with the rest of the week. And again, we want to get you guys' feedback on those, especially at the evening sessions. And so some of the things we looked at was just to tee Cons Road into Pleasant, and then to add. We looked at the area along Cons Road a little bit. It seems like there is some pretty decent opportunity as far as open land for development of possibly offices, possibly other larger commercial type, just because the land is there. And there's not too many other options in Northampton to have sort of almost like a business district in a way. One of the other challenges that I forgot to mention was along Pleasant, you have on the east side, the railroad track is running right along it, which really constricts what you can do between Pleasant Avenue and, Pleasant Road, Pleasant Street. It's one of those, on Street. There's streets here, okay. Great, thank you. So on Pleasant Street, between Pleasant Street and the railroad, it's not that wide. It's probably about 150 to 200 feet wide. And Scott, who's going to present another plan in a second, had actually looked up a precedent that you might possibly be able to discuss. But you have the opportunity to have parking behind retail in front with that amount of space between there. Retail stores range from, I guess, depths between 60 and 80 feet, and parking is 60 feet for just a regular two-way parking to 120 feet if you have a second row. So there is the opportunity to have buildings pushed up to the street front with parking back behind there. And then access to the parking back behind there, which would almost be an alley between the railroad and the buildings in the front. Services and things like that could possibly be back behind there. And then we also took a look at the area with Hockenham Road coming in, possibly ending on a little plaza type of thing with a fountain or some sort of public amenity right at the end of that coming in. And again, that seems like an interesting intersection as far as traffic goes.
Maybe with this way, this is coming at 90 degrees, 90-degree angle, maybe something here too, where you could have outdoor seating for restaurants or some kind of venue that would be able to use that.
Yeah. Because it's nice if you create space, people actually want to go there and want to hang out. Even if it is a lot of traffic going by, there's still space off to the side where people could sit and possible options for restaurants down there or various things like that. And then again, as we went up, we saw the opportunity for a couple infill buildings in between there with all the services and everything else being behind there along the railroad track where residents wouldn't per se want to live too much along there. We're aware that the railroad isn't used too much right now as far as just a couple trains. Is it during the night that the trains usually go, or freight trains, daytime? Okay. So it's, okay. So it's not as big a deal right now, I guess, per se. But the potential could be there.
20 to 25 years ago, there's a passenger train that came through there.
Yeah.
And I have to expect that rail travel will be one of the options looked
I
at.
think it might pick up. And then Dan started to take a look more on the northern section of Pleasant Street as well.
Yeah, I looked at the train station area and in this bike path, and what I would say about the train station area, there's the large parking lot that's adjacent to it that is accessible from Pleasant Street, and I was wondering if there might be a way to consolidate that amount of parking or even expand upon it by building a garage that would be tucked back along the railroad tracks, accessible from a drive as opposed to an actual street, and it would just be a lane instead. And then maybe there's some kind of commercial or retail space that might actually front onto Pleasant Street in some manner. And then the bike path, I've shown it more or less the way it's already been proposed along the interurban rail, which is becoming a reality as we speak. Then, as Josh had mentioned, having the spur go through what this natural preserve area here. Basically, as we were talking about infilling some of the vacant lots or where there isn't currently buildings, I've looked at doing that here north of the bike path. One area I thought in particular might be along, help me out, Josh, the street. It's
the street.
East Side Rail.
Strong Avenue.
Strong Avenue, thank you. I was looking at maybe doing something that might close off this block, and maybe there is parking, but it's actually located in a plaza type space. But yeah, I think the concerns for me from the train station would be to provide the parking in a way that is more aesthetically friendly to the street, Pleasant Street, and at the same time, if there are views of the train station, I'd like to go back and revisit it just to see it again. But I thought about leaving this open where the bike path is, which right now it's already conserved space that isn't supposed to be developed, from my understanding. But I think that actually might be nice to leave that open there so that there is some kind of view, people can actually see the station, since there are venues located in there. But if you have any suggestions how I might, better explore this, I certainly would appreciate it.
Now, Scott and Crystal also developed a scheme that they can talk about a little bit as well.
So we'll introduce all these things and then certainly open it up for your feedback. Soon thereafter. Yeah, just really working on sort of similar precepts that Josh and Dan came up with. One of the things we just looked at a sort of variation of the scheme. With one of the elements was rather than sort of where they had a slightly larger build out at the intersections here, we looked at opening them up into small pocket parks and a traffic circle. So you still have a sense of entrance into the town, and this sort of becomes a little neighborhood park as an amenity there.
Sort of acts as a transitional period coming into town before it gets maybe a little bit more dense in here, something that's a little bit greener here, and opens up some parkland, like Scott said, for the people who are actually living in this area.
A little bit louder.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
This area just sort of acting as a transitional area as you move from outside of town into inside of town, and opening up little pocket parks for the neighborhoods, making it a little bit more pleasant for the people that live there.
As far as defining center and edge of Northampton, the village, having a sense of entrance and gateway, and then the street becomes slightly more urban with the sidewalk and planted along Pleasant Street. You have trees coming along the edge, and then also to draw potentially another extension to draw people into the bike path. We thought about continuing for these streets. They intersect, bringing them across is opportunities for paseos or pedestrian passages, and those of you can't see behind the pier, I apologize, will come up here please. To continue them as entrances to the potential bike path along the railroad tracks. So really the second variation, and I think Glenn and Chris will speak to Florence Senna.
So we trouble a lot because we started in pairs and then we mixed up the pairs and mixed up the projects. So you'll see it's all kind of shuffling around.
Trying to get all of our minds looking at all the different issues.
So Crystal and I worked on Florence initially, and it's always good for us to start on a large scale and kind of understand how everything's kind of fitting together within the area. So we started with the streets and the parks and that network and how that worked together. And one of the things that we found was that there were seemingly good starts of streets in a lot of places in Florence, really good bones, but in a lot of places they weren't really quite connecting, which meant it put a lot of pressure on certain streets getting traffic through town, and even just localized neighborhood traffic couldn't actually get through, and even some cul-de-sacs in some areas, which actually take a public way and make it private because nobody goes down it except the people who live on it. So the idea was to really try to start making a public network of streets to kind of allow the web to accept all of the movement of the people throughout the city, including pedestrians and bikes and all of the above. So the diagram basically shows existing streets in this lighter gray color, and then we tried, and we may have missed one or two, so we were up on the ladder doing it at the last minute, but trying to show the connections that we proposed, which kind of helped make the web work a little bit better. And you'll find that we made connections that kind of start linking things through a little bit more, so that it starts holding together a little bit better as a network. And so we'll talk about parks.
Just to expand on looking at connecting these streets, as well as making the neighborhood more accessible via pedestrian and bicycle and traffic, it also relieves a lot of traffic pressure, because what you do when you only have one or two options, as I'm sure you all realize, you sort of bottleneck traffic. And so by connecting some little pieces, you give people more options to drive around and relieve the pressure that might be on Main Street otherwise, or West Street. So then what we also did was we looked at an existing bike path here, and bike paths are wonderful, so we thought, and we heard a lot of interest from you guys about wanting to reconnect with the river. So what we thought is it would be a really great thing to have a bike path along this river here, and have it be one alternative for driving to connecting not only Florence with the river, but Florence with the rest of Northampton, and also possibly Leeds. And so what we did was we brought this bike path along the river, and then wanted to connect it with these streets, so proposed different networks of the bike path to also link up with some parks. So what we have is we have some existing already public reserved green space, and this one up here. And then a couple spots we found that might be really wonderful to introduce some public gardens. I know we heard some interest yesterday from having.
Could you orient us and show us?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Sorry.
This is Main Street here,
Okay,
and Maple Street is here.
So
So this is that triangular
got it.
arc right here.
Northampton's down here.
Actually, just the scale of this is the scale of that. And this drawing, next to that drawing, it was
Up higher, it lines up.
That's where, they're the same scale.
We just brought it down so you can
Yeah,
see
no.
it better. So what we were looking at is these two particular areas here. There were some lots that
could potentially be thought of. They weren't built on and used for community gardens or community agriculture. We heard some interest from you guys yesterday about wanting to have the community be able to grow its own food and be more sustainable in that way. So providing urban areas in which to do that. And
Can you
linking
point
that up.
out where you, where,
One is right here. It's just a block north of Main Street.
It's the Florence Savings Bank field.
yep.
Oh, okay.
Excellent, yeah.
It's along the bike path, so it's not actually on the street,
Yeah,
but it's tucked in the block.
one thing we thought would be great is to have the bike path access to these kind of gardens, as well as street access. We proposed this street coming through. And then the other one would be slightly up north, a block off of Maple Street here. So, and this street going north and south here is existing, but we propose connecting this east-west street, which would connect through the garden that we're proposing.
And part of that too is the blocks, some of the block sizes were really, really large. And when it just kind of really narrows the efficiency, it creates lots with, the lots are already quite large and quite deep, but there was actually land that was owned that was in the middle of the block that didn't have street access in some cases.
Isn't
So
that
that's,
a Cannon Field up there?
So those
This-
are,
yeah, this is not actually owned by the city.
are those
No,
proposed
but-
parks, the green, or is it?
Okay. So this is, these three are existing parks. And these are areas that we thought would be great opportunities for parks or for community farms, because they're large areas of unbuilt property that didn't have very good street access, and along other amenities, other public amenities like bike path or another street. So they seem like great opportunities. They don't, of course, this is a 50-year plan, and it doesn't have to happen tomorrow.
For visuality, the one up there on Maple, how far is that from like BLK?
Oh, let me see. I'm not sure.
Here.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So 1 to 200 then.
That's-
So this is,
What's across the street?
That red cross.
sorry, we don't have any of the names printed on our underneath. So Aaron, do you know the cross street here? This is proposed. This is a new proposed area of the street. The street actually only goes here. So this is Maple Street here.
Actually, you can see.
So it's
right,
one street off of
you
Maple.
can look up on this drawing, you can see this is Florence. That's the center, that's the intersection right there. So here's the, really, effectively, is this the school up there? This building is, so the garden is right about there. So from the intersection of Main Street and what's the North South Street? It's about, the garden is about a 5-minute walk. And it's about another 5-minute walk from the garden to the school.
Yeah, so there's, I'm sorry we don't know the names of all the streets yet. It's quite a large area. We're working on it.
We'll get it. One thing I wanted to add too is when looking at the streets, we also wanted to look, we didn't dive too much into this, but we wanted to look a little bit at connecting Florence Heights with the main part of Florence, because there's not really a lot of access for those two communities to interact currently. And so we'll look at this closer later, but right now we just sort of wanted to make sure that we were understanding how some of these streets might connect through a little bit better to connect Florence Heights.
And to give better pedestrian access to some of the community shopping and, you know, the hardware store and whatever else we can get in there.
I'm a bit anxious to hear of talk of cul-de-sacs being breached, because cul-de-sacs are well-known crime prevention devices. They're also very friendly environments for families with young children, because the traffic flow is limited and very slow. And in Springfield in the past year, I mean, there were a couple cases where citizens begged and pleaded the city to make cul-de-sacs of a couple streets, and it did in fact reduce crime on those streets. So there's competing values along with traffic efficiency.
Yes, and another part of safety that they've actually done many studies on as well is eyes on the street actually make safe streets. And so in cases where you have a street that nobody goes down and you don't have activity and pedestrian activity, then you create more opportunities for crime. So while cul-de-sacs can be useful, they are, in in a typology, although not always technically owned privately, they behave more so as a private street because it only serves the people who live on that particular street. And because the streets are actually, in most cases, and correct us if we're wrong, it's different in different places, but as far as we know, the street rights-of-ways are actually owned by the city. So it's just, I mean, it's partly balancing, a lot of different poles. And of course, remember, this is not going to happen tomorrow. It may not ever happen. It's just suggestions, and we're really trying to look at the big picture, trying to see how we can make it all kind of work as a very large, complicated organism a little bit better. And part of that is assuming some good faith and good community among the population as well.
One of the things too
So,
is
but can I just ask, please? We really want to open it up for questions at the end. So if we could just keep moving through the presentation so you can kind of see all of the proposals, because we haven't even really gotten into the fun stuff here yet. So,
yeah, that's a good one.
and we'll open it up at the very end. So anyway, so let's maybe move on to the.
So what we did after we looked at the larger network is we zoomed in on Main Street, and particularly this area where Main Street and Park Street come together and create an opportunity for a really great main public space for Florence.
Sorry.
Sorry, we work in this is called trace paper, and some people call it Don Juan, but it allows us to see a lot of different options all at once, so we layer it up. So the first option, how we started looking at this is, we looked at Main Street and realized that right now, as it terminates, well not terminates, but as it turns the corner here, there's sort of this not so pleasant intersection that occurs here. This is really a grand street, and it really deserves a grand movement, urbanistically and architecturally, because the center of the city is, it can be one of the proudest moments that a community has within itself. So what we wanted to do was look at creating a really great space for people to spend time and gather together at this major node within Florence. So the first thing we took a look at was creating sort of a plaza here within this intersection and building up a little bit of density around that so that you really are able to, Phil was talking about spaces, we've all been talking about spaces over the past few days, to really sort of sculpt a space within this area so that this becomes a plaza, say that a couple cafes open out onto and you have people sitting around and drinking coffee and eating good food and talking. And at the same time, we were looking at, this is sorry, not Mayf, I don't know the name of this street. No, Park Street. Where Park Street comes down here, we actually were looking at putting in another pocket park. It's a really pleasant thing that you all have also expressed interest in providing for your communities, and this seemed like a great opportunity to provide that amenity to the community. And so, let's see after that.
One thing about this is we realized that there is a space there currently, and it's a nice park, but because it's kind of an island in all of the traffic movement, and it's not big enough to kind of feel separated from that, it makes it a little bit less usable. So part of the effort was to try to make that area a little bit more usable and a little more of a place that you actually want to go and spend time in. And the great thing is, Florence, we didn't have to go very far. Florence already kind of has a center that wants to happen there. So it wasn't a stretch for us, really, to just fill in a few empty sites to kind of help hold it together. And another thing that we were looking at is when you come in on this road, it would be great if you could see something and have a view to some beautiful building. similar to the idea of what happens with City Hall, and I know that that's controversial. People like City Hall, people don't like City Hall here in Northampton. But you know, a beautiful building, whatever your idea of a beautiful building is, but maybe it has a tower. And actually, Aaron told us that there actually used to be a building, an old, beautiful building on that site that did have a tower. So who knows? Maybe you rebuild that. I don't know. But anyway, just to kind of clarify on that. So then we have
Where you're talking about a park, isn't that the cemetery?
No, down.
this.
Now, isn't that the Park Street Cemetery?
This is on. Is this the cemetery here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now, as a matter of fact, this is a point of historical reference. Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which was the first big public cemetery in the United States that was not affiliated to the church. In the first 20 years or so of its existence, was a popular recreational destination, so much so that they had to make ordinances prohibiting that, but it gave the idea to William Cullen Bryant, who was the editor of the New York Post, to advocate and lobby for the creation of Central Park. So there's an interesting historical relationship between cemeteries and recreational parks, but I think that's not what we're doing.
Okay, so we have that marked, and we'll find another spot for that same line of it. There's plenty of room along here too, so.
Great news is, we still have the proximity of a beautiful green space to a public space.
And the good thing too about all of these ideas, that a lot of times we're presenting more than one idea in each scheme, but oftentimes, not always, they can kind of be interchanged to some extent. I mean, everything's kind of related and we have to kind of achieve an overall balance, but you know, so if you like one, don't get caught up if you don't like one part of it. There are other
They're all
things that
very
can be
working
used,
drawings
so
that can fluctuate.
keep that in mind as we keep working through this.
So we took sort of a similar, same thing to what we did over here, was looking at one thing, but then looking at it again in a slightly different way. We did that here. And so we took sort of the same concept as understanding that this really wants to be opened up into a great public space. It's accessible for people and wonderful and usable. And so we took a look at what it might look like if it were more centralized. And so it's not attached to one side anymore, but it's its own sort of floating entity within the middle of the street network. But how, and as Cohen pointed out, that's sort of the condition that currently exists, but how we might be able to create that condition to make it more usable and more friendly for people.
And part of that is a little bit of traffic engineering, if you will. I don't claim to be a traffic engineer, but in a lot of cities, especially, I lived in DC for a couple of years, so that's on a much bigger scale, but they have some spaces that really manage the traffic really well, and allow even small medians that allow the pedestrian to cross half the street at a time, which allows the traffic to keep flowing in some areas, but the pedestrians are less impeded by the traffic. So trying to introduce a couple of those elements in, and this could actually be a one-way loop, so you would actually come in here and go around to go up there, or come in here and turn right. It's kind of a right yield condition around, so you actually only have 2 lanes of traffic going around that area, and you don't have all 4 lanes going through. So lots of opportunity there. And I think that Aaron, is there something else?
No, sorry. I was going to
And this is
point out
cemetery,
this,
as we know.
right? This is the community garden that we were speaking of
Right.
earlier. And it's connected to the bike paths.
So as Glinda mentioned, this is a strategy that the studio sort of adopted today as a way of getting a bunch of different ideas out was, so we're independently from each other and actually have different teams tackling the same sites just to generate lots of ideas. And Dan and I actually took a bit of a field trip this morning down to Florence also, spent some time sitting at the new cafe that's just opened up and sort of watching the activity on the street, and which is right here on this corner. I'm sorry?
Can you tell us what the corner is?
Yes, the corner of Maple and Main Street, right across from the mobile station. And sorry, the Cup and Top. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we were sitting at the Cup and Top and looking across to the mobile station, which is closed down now, thinking how nice it would be to have something more like the block where Bird's corner store is right now there, rather than just an empty parking lot. And so we started thinking about that, and then started thinking about other opportunities for infill along Main Street in Florence. We didn't come up with anything quite as dramatic or spectacular as this piazza here, but we came with something which might be more manageable in the short term. And that was to start infilling with commercial and mixed-use commercial residential blocks along Main Street to try to create the sort of more intimate village feel that I think Florence sometimes aspires to. We also looked at putting a more monumental building at the end of the axis of Main Street where Cosmian Hall used to be. We looked at filling, and you can see in this diagram, like with previous diagrams, the black buildings are existing buildings and the brown buildings are buildings that we proposed for infill.
Sorry, just a side note, Cohen and I actually didn't do that in our schemes. We just showed you that we lumped we lumped existing and new buildings together, just so you're not confused.
Thanks. We looked at this intersection and tried to build. We also thought that it might be really great to add 1 or 2 stories of residential or office space above where the pizza factory building is right now, because that would also add to the definition of the street, and it would add to the liveliness of that intersection and create more of a spatial feel there, which at the moment is a little bit amorphous and poorly defined. And then we looked at just filling in blocks down Main Street to try to create a real street there. We also looked at the area in between the 2 large mill buildings that exist, one of which I think is now medical offices, and the other is a number of studio spaces. And there's currently a gas station in between the 2, but seeing that 2 gas stations in the last several years have closed down in Florence, and in one case have been replaced by a very nice infill project, the Northampton Cooperative Bank branch, and in the other case it's open-ended, we don't know what's going to happen there. Thinking that that might also be an opportunity to create perhaps some sort of public plaza, or maybe it would be an opportunity for a farmer's market of some sort, or other sort of public park, and that perhaps we could create some sort of low sheltering structure in there, some sort of colonnade as a place for market stalls or those sorts of community activities to create a spatial center for Florence there. So there are a number of different options that we could imagine for the center of Florence that would sort of follow similar principles. We also looked at this area behind Main Street here and thought that perhaps in an area which is now parking lots for the most part, and there's some of the mill buildings extend back in this direction, that we could have an opportunity for infill there, and that might actually, because it's sort of in the back of the block and therefore less valuable land, that might be an opportunity for some affordable housing. Dan, do you want to describe the God's houses that we encountered in Bruges that we looked at as a precedent for that?
Sure. In Bruges, in the late Middle Ages, the merchants in the city, which were very powerful, actually opened almshouses, but they're places where the elderly, the infirm, or people who were just essentially the lowest income of the city basically could live for free, and they were taken care of by the people that volunteered there. But essentially, it was a living arrangement, and here's an example.
Can you all see this photograph?
Yeah, and this is the interior, Dan, the exterior is behind you.
Right. Let me hold this up a little bit. This is some pretty elegant, affordable housing. But, so you can see, it creates a sort of communal space, and the units themselves are very, very small in size, but they're, it's quite a pleasant place to live. And so what we thought is that, we might have an opportunity for something like that back behind Main Street in Florence. And we could create a sort of park with trees, and we could create a row, sort of like mini row houses. And that could be a potential place for public housing, or we could try to introduce that sort of element somewhere else in Florence or in Northampton. It's a typology that we're sort of interested in looking at as a model for affordable housing. So,
and another thing too is it might provide opportunities for education, particularly with some of the development that we're proposing here along Main Street. There might be, of course, we thought that the location near the town center would be good because they would be close, within walking distance of basically essential needs of retail, but also perhaps there might be educational opportunities there, training or something that might be afforded in some of these spaces that could be leased and rented out by organizations.
So, several options for Florence.
If I can just add about the God's houses, these are units that they're between 400 and 500 square feet, and they're basically they would house a single person or a couple. It's essentially one room with a little loft space in it, and they all are organized around this court. And actually, behind Dan, if you can maybe step away or hold out the image. They tend to occupy a block. You can see where this is located in a fairly dense urban area. That's the exterior, and you go through the center entry there into this court, and then you access the units from inside. So,
Where exactly is that?
where is it? It's in Belgium. It's in the city of Bruges. And these buildings, and it actually goes back to some of the things we were talking about this afternoon about the durability of buildings. These buildings are all about 300 or 400 years old. So,
sustainable.
Sustainable.
And one of the things I really was struck by when we were in Bruges this winter is the fact that even though this dates, I think, to the 16th or 17th centuries, that the idea that the private citizen with means would actually do this as a charitable gesture. And I mean, the mercantilism of Belgium isn't so distant from our own economic system today, and so that might also be an alternative way of looking at creating this housing and leasable space.
I forgot to mention, just briefly before we move on to the center of Northampton, a diagram that we've made here, and this is a diagram that you'll be seeing more of as we continue to work. It's a section through the street, which means that it's cutting through the buildings on either side of the street. It's showing the width of the sidewalks, and it's showing the width of the road and the lanes in the road. And what we did here, Dan made this drawing here showing the existing section through the intersection of Main Street and Maple Street in Florence. So it goes through the old Noble station. Here's the road, and here's the pizza factory building right on that corner. So one-story building is about 20 feet high, and then you've got the gas station overhang here, and the big sign that says mobile on it. And then this is a section showing what we're proposing at the intersection. And as you can see, it creates a much more intimate space. You have buildings that are more on the order of 50 feet high. And this is increased density, but it's making the space much closer to the spaces that are, best liked in Northampton already. And I think importantly also, people talk about wanting to maintain Florence's own particular character, which is somewhat smaller and more intimate than downtown Northampton. And we want to show that by creating infill and building up higher, you're not sacrificing that, because there's still a big difference between this and this, which is a section through Main Street downtown. So just by virtue of the fact that this is 2 or 3 times as wide, as you can see, it feels much different. So I think we should take a look at downtown now. Sure.
We'll work away to the window. Looking at downtown, the primary issues we were working with here were issues of refill and infill properties in downtown to increase opportunities with regard to housing, and also densify the core and maintain and preserve the open space in Northampton. Additionally, infill refill, also looking at public spaces, particularly the streets and squares, and what are some of the opportunities for civic engagement, particularly here at the core of the community. One of the things that came up in a number of our focus groups discussions over the last few days was interest in perhaps expanding the farmers market. I understand there's one on Saturdays and also one on Tuesdays that was going along that were quite popular, and there's maybe a possibility to expand that. We are all, several of us are familiar with the farmers market in South Bend that we frequent, but also examples throughout the country, and thinking that might be still an area that Northampton would be interested in maybe providing a better venue for. So we looked at, so of 2 of the 3 schemes for downtown, I think all 3 incorporate that, but just for example, 2 ideas. One is here at the south, I think this is Hampton, Northampton's Avenue. This is currently a parking lot, and with pavilions on either side, the orangish hue represents like a brick pave or special paving surface, distinguished out from the asphalt.
Can you tell us again where it is?
It's south, and it's
This is
Hampton.
Wait, give us a landmark.
Yeah, no, certainly. This is orange. This is a
The parking lot behind Thorn.
It's the big parking lot.
Behind.
Yes, behind Thorn.
Here's City Hall.
Actually,
Here's City Hall.
let me just say,
Yep.
this is the big parking lot behind Thorns.
On
and-
Hampton Avenue.
Yeah, and this is the even bigger parking lot behind that.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
alongside the proposed bike path.
Correct, correct.
Yes.
And which is here. So the proposed bike path is included here. Here in the brown. So we have one option for a farmer's market here. It would have a colonnaded pavilion on either side of the paving, which the market would occur here. Another option would be actually directly behind us, in which we would create a colonnade here, and you'd have an internal moment in the city that right now is we find is underutilized space, and there's actually a great opportunity here to create a market and add some activity and take advantage of some Hanson buildings and also potential for some infill buildings there as well.
This is an infill.
And correct. Again, the brown is infill, the gray, the dark charcoal color is existing.
And this is where we are right now. So it's right out the back window. There will be a new building there that would front the piazza. So.
And right. One of the other things that we focused on when looking at downtown Northampton, in addition to infill buildings sort of around the periphery of downtown, was Main Street itself. We heard a lot of people talking to us about how much they like Main Street, but we also heard a lot of comments about the traffic that goes down Main Street and how wide Main Street is. And actually, even though Northampton is generally considered a pretty pedestrian-friendly place, it can be somewhat daunting to cross from one side of Main Street to the other, just because it's such a vast space and you do have cars coming from both sides. So one of the things we looked at is, well, how much could we actually narrow Main Street and thereby gain more sidewalk space on either side, and maybe even have room for a bike lane also. And what we found is that using sort of standard lane widths of 10 feet, we could still get 2 lanes of traffic going in each direction, and we can double the width of the sidewalks on either side, from 15 feet to 30 feet, which means that all the restaurants on either side of the street can have outdoor seating if they want, instead of having for pedestrians to go back and forth. And on top of that, you can have a 5-foot bike lane going in both directions. And that's what we've illustrated here. This is the current street section, which shows that the sidewalk is just this little area on either side here, and we've got parking both sides. And then we have these 17-foot lanes of traffic. And then if we just bring the curb out 15 feet, we can have much more space for people to walk on either side.
For a total of 30 feet.
Total 30 feet on each side. We narrow the road bed by 30 feet, 15 feet on each side. We get 4 lanes of 10-foot, 4 10-foot lanes, still parking on each side. And if you really wanted to expand the sidewalks even more, you could go to parallel parking instead of perpendicular parking, although that would mean sacrificing some parking spaces. But even with maintaining the perpendicular parking spaces, we can double the size of the sidewalks if we want to. So that's something that we looked at.
And just in addition, we thought that so I'm mindful that any parking that we were displaced would need to be replaced. And on this scheme, for example, an opportunity for a parking garage here across from the train station, and a few other moments in town, in any situation where we consider a parking garage, we would certainly have first floor retail or shops, certainly to allow that would maintain an active street life. It would not be what unfortunately has become too many parking garages in the States.
I think that's really important.
I just wanted to speak to one other issue. Here came up with some preliminary schemes for Pulaski Park, and one idea was perhaps even an amphitheater here, and to help reorient the park into the city. And again, we saw a video on Sunday night of performances that were on. There was a music festival in, I believe, March or April, that had a number of musicians that take advantage of the local talent. And this might be an opportunity for civic performances and to showcase that talent.
We have one more proposal for downtown.
So we did, go ahead.
Well, a couple of things regarding our scheme. Took an even wider glance at the downtown area and some of the traffic patterns and things like that. The biggest move as far as streets and things like that go, which I'm sure is a little controversial, is moving Route 66 coming in Over here so you guys can see. Moving Route 66 from its current location coming in down past, I'm sorry, Elm. I think Elm's coming out here.
Yeah.
So Main Street, Elm. How it ties into Elm Street. We looked at moving that from there along and moving it along the proposed bike path, back behind, or underneath the bridge, next to the, there's what happened there. But anyway, basically bringing it as a secondary option to Main Street and bringing it and dead ending it near the area down by the railroad into Pleasant Street. And what that kind of does is it relieves traffic off of Main Street, obviously brings traffic back there, but kind of gives an average flow to the area and pulls off some of the intensity of Main Street off of there, and also allows for potential growth in between there, because there's not a whole lot back there right now the way it is. So that was just initially one quick big picture move that kind of changes the whole character of this area. And I guess Cohen, I'm going to talk about that.
Well, and not to mention, I mean, everybody wants to live close to this. So by adding a street back there, you giving street access, you add 1, 2, 3, well, a long block, at least 3 to 4 more blocks worth of housing and potential mixed use, and maybe it's small units, maybe it's big units, but it provides more opportunity for people to live closer to the things that where they love to be. So that is part of it. And again, I preface this with, we're throwing out wild ideas here. And this move does not negate this move. Those are kind of separate to some extent. So we're just trying to get everybody kind of thinking about things in ways that maybe they hadn't thought about them before. So that's kind of the purpose of tonight and this week. But one of the things that we found in studying this was we actually decided to take out the angled parking because we know that it is kind of hazardous backing up that way. The visibility is pretty poor backing out onto that busy road. And also, as Aaron had said, narrowing the lane widths. Right now the lanes out there they have to be at least 11 feet. The lanes are? They are huge. I mean, highway standards are 11 feet, maybe 12, depending on the speeds. So it's very, very wide, which means that when you're driving, it actually feels like it's okay to drive fast. So that's why people tend to drive a lot faster. So I'm trying to really narrow that up. And of course, the one option is you either put more sidewalk in, which is great, or you have actually enough room there that you can actually put a usable space 30 feet wide, probably nearly the width of this room, in the middle too. Well, not both. You can do one or the other. Either it goes to the sidewalks or it goes to the middle. And in some areas, this is actually a plaza that could be almost 60 feet wide. So it's quite wide. You could get your farmers markets and things running in there as well. And then there's room down here. Basically, when you take the roads off and you just look at the buildings, it kind of looks like there's a big box there. So we thought, hey, why not? Let's try park there. So we had to kind of change some things to get that to work out, but just to kind of start thinking about how you might have different types of spaces in proximity to each other that could provide different types of uses, and also help extend. Right now there's a lot of really great kind of real estate for retail right along Main Street, but what that does is it forces out all the neighborhood things. We've been hearing a lot that we want hardware stores and we want maybe a small grocery store, the things that you need nearby. And unfortunately with market pressures, the only way you're going to get that is if you kind of allow a little more room for that to kind of start to get away from maybe the main path of travel and get back into where the people who actually live there are. So, and now that we're planning to put big commercial in there at all, it's just that if you allow it to start kind of maybe trickling down those streets just a little bit off of Main Street, that's really will get good places to put some of those other functions that everybody needs.
Yeah, part of the system down Main Street and up to where Elm starts to take over. Because basically it's a system of parks and green space from the corner of the old City Hall right here with the green yard and everything on the side of it into a plaza between this building and the buildings across there, which actually between this building and the buildings across the street there's actually yeah, like Linda said, wide enough to accommodate a 60-foot wide plaza or little green space that would be wide enough to accommodate the farmer's market right in the middle of Main Street, which I know obviously there's pedestrian issues and things like that. But then you can continue a boulevard type of thing to the Pulaski Park, and then also up to what we're proposing here is a square up where Elm Street starts to take off there, because there's a lot of room there where it starts to go up the hill. And obviously there's traffic impacts, there's pedestrian impacts, there's cost obviously with all of this, but we won't hopefully get into that too much right now.
Well, yeah, nice, go ahead. Sorry.
No, and another thing that we were looking at is actually on axis with Pulaski Park is Masonic Street, which comes out, and it's more of a service street in a way. The buildings that face onto that are the sides of the buildings and everything. And one thing that come up in the talks, which I know is something that comes up in a lot of cities and everything, are to turn certain streets into pedestrian-only streets, where they can have fairs and festivals and things like that. And we thought that might possibly be a good location for that, because it is on axis with Pulaski Park, which could be a very nice civic park. So you have the park there, and then you have a pedestrian corridor that runs right into it, which we thought would be kind of a neat extension from Main Street down to the inner part of that neighborhood.
And that was actually an idea that we got from one of the meetings. So put it up there and see what everybody
On Masonic Street.
And since it's only runs a block anyway, it's a good candidate for something like that.
And it doesn't really disrupt too much the system of streets in town. So.
If I could add just one thing to the comment that was made about the proposal to shift Route 66 so that it goes south of Main Street along the right-of-way where the bike path is. Now, we recognize that there's probably a controversial thing, particularly if you're a cyclist. But one of the consequences of doing that, and I guess we should say that I'm presuming, because I didn't have anything to do with this, but I want to draw this out, that the presumption is not that the bike right-of-way goes away, somehow that the bike path and the street would coexist, but that one of the things that would happen as a consequence of shifting Route 66 there is that you would draw a lot of the traffic that's anticipated on Village Hill, that presumably is commuting into and out of the city, much of it towards Springfield. You would give it access to Route 91 in a way that would otherwise require it every day to go to and from Northampton through Main Street.
Yeah.
So that was something that was in our thinking. That has been in our thinking and discussions about this, and I just wanted to point that out as something that we were conscious of.
And one counter effect of that is it puts more traffic on Cons Street as well as Pleasant Street. But with Cons Street and Pleasant Street, you would still have two options within Northampton to get down to that bridge, I guess.
It has implications for Cons and Pleasant, both. And so.
Well, I guess we'll open it up to questions.
To segue directly from that, what it unfortunately does is it takes the traffic out of West Street, the Smith College campus, Earl Street neighborhood, and South Street neighborhood. All those neighborhoods and campus will suffer from that remaining only a bike path. The bike path could go into the Mill River Historic Restoration Project, which is to bring the Mill River back to that lowland, which is now just low. And so the bike path could be along the river, just like you proposed in parking along, parallel parking
parallel,
along the river.
okay.
And that railroad bed is 28 feet wide. It was planned for, when they did the overpass on New South Street, it was planned for that road to actually go under the underpass and out the railroad bed. That was the original concept. And the retaining walls from the old railroad bed are 32 and 35 feet wide. So there's a very wide width there for 2 lanes of intercity buses, a parking lane, and then you could have a boardwalk which could be sort of built on the lower retaining wall looking over the river.
Yeah. Well, obviously, this is something, this is something for us to look at, in more detail. We're still figuring out all the implications of this.
I think what I missed a little bit is maybe the importance of pedestrian connections and maybe a map that's really showing what pedestrian connections are important in Northampton and Florence. So you have an argument, is it an important corridor, pedestrian corridor, this bike path or not? Or what does it really connect, or what are the potentials, what could it connect? So we look at the system again of pedestrian corridors, and I want to comment on the first scheme here. I think you discovered this Middle River. I think that's great, but now what we're proposing, like you're not connecting it again to the streetscape, to Pleasant Street. I would expect something that is connecting it in a pedestrian network to the Pleasant Street, and then farther on. So
Yeah, the main reason that didn't happen was because of the facility right there.
yeah,
We felt a little leery about just pulling out buildings. If you pull that one out, I mean,
There's
you
a lot
can
of buildings.
easily.
maybe you can create a park gateway here, or somewhat addressing that, because I discovered that thing 1 year ago, and it's a really fascinating area, but it's totally undiscovered.
Yeah.
And I think it should be integrated, and it's great to be integrated to the bike path here. So I would definitely, I like your approaches, that you look at the urban edge, that you look at the streetscape, that you're looking for infill possibilities. Well, I would ask, is there really request for infill, probably?
But what is it you're saying that you want to see integrated that's not integrated?
This corridor should be integrated. It's now an island, and I think it should be integrated first to the bike rail, and then probably somewhere here.
Okay.
I think that this could be an opportunity for a great park that is totally undiscovered. So I said I like the attention to the edges. I'm not so sure about that traffic island in Florence here. Probably it'll be a traffic island. But I like your spatial expression there. But maybe you can accommodate with traffic. And there was another thing. Well, again, the bike trail connectivity. Like here, I would make it clearer. What are the connections? Right. That was this scheme here. So here we have a bike path, right? So is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. So I missed that on your scheme, and how you connect again the pedestrian circulation. How you connect this Main Street. Yeah. How could that connect to here, or where are important linkages to this? Because this is a very important pedestrian corridor. So again, pedestrian connections. And have you been here during rush hour? How much traffic is driving through? So with the narrowing of the road and less parking, I think one issue is that the business that are here, some of them they really need on-street parking. And if you don't need find a parking place here, you go somewhere else in the garage, and that's fine. But I think there has to be an adequate number of parking spaces. So
we weren't.
You bring up a lot of really good points, and all those, and the parking. The assumption is if we take parking off of Main Street, it will be provided.
Another thing is topo. I think you might look at the topo here.
Yeah, it's pretty good size. So.
It's sloping.
Just to let you know, we weren't advocating removing all the parking downtown. We would just turn the diagonal to on the street, I guess. Which
you go.
Yeah, you're still
pretty
taking
bad
it out.
for some people. Right?
The thing about the lanes though is actually when you slow traffic down, following distances get shorter, which means in a shorter distance you can actually fit more cars. So there have been engineering studies that actually show that. On another project I worked on with traffic engineers, we actually had a consultant. That was
very slowly. You will see.
That was one of the things, though, that if you can slow it down, then it actually helps that. But also, I mean, it's going to be a lot of different measures to help with traffic.
And another thing, sorry, I might add that even though we've talked a lot about cars linking up in our street systems, the entire time that we're looking at these systems and these drawings, we really are thinking about the pedestrian throughout these schemes, and we really want to provide as much walkability as possible.
Yeah, look at this really as a system, connections and places.
Right.
And the
so
street-
we're also trying to sculpt spaces for pedestrians.
And we're hoping, to follow what Chris was saying too, we're hoping by doing that, it'll actually lessen, the dependence on the car to at least residents.
So, and just to clarify, the street, when we say street, we don't mean cars. We mean pedestrians, cars, bikes, all of it. Trucks, trees.
I want to invite you to consider the idea of, yes, removing some parking. Copenhagen, for example, removes, 2 to 3% of their parking per year and replaces it with pedestrian access. Let's do that here, and I encourage you to incorporate throughout the rest of the week to incorporate that concept into your design work.
That's a really interesting point. One of the things that we heard last night was that a large majority of the parking in downtown Northampton actually comes from people who live within a mile. So people who actually live within walking distance are parking, so it must not be that hard to park. It's perceived as being very difficult, but maybe some study needs to go into that. Another big question mark.
All right.
Can I?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, I've got a couple of pet issues that aren't related to this, and I've only been to a couple hours worth of meetings, so you may have discussed these things already. Forgive me if you had. The first is, have you addressed the fact that Main Street, in terms of its viability for business, sort of dies around Pulaski Park? It's very striated. It ends, businesses can't survive. Pulaski Park is populated by people that really want to go there, but it isn't an integral part of the way people move through downtown. And then it becomes Smith, and then it becomes residential. So you're not a yes. But my other thing, and this is a bigger pet issue, I'm about to move away from Northampton because I'm one of those people with multiple advanced degrees that can't find a job here. And so I've heard you talk about pedestrians, and I've heard you talk about affordable housing, which are issues that are close to my heart. But have you also, in your designs, thought about creating office space, or I don't even know what I'm asking you. Have you thought about ways of bringing businesses in that would employ people like me so we could stay here?
I would say certainly, and there are a lot of issues. One of the things you're presenting, this is just for 3 of like 12 to 18 different sites that we're considering in the community, which we hope to address. And one of there's a whole myriad of issues that have been raised. One of them has been the economy. How do you accommodate for new jobs, support the creative economy, creative community here in Northampton, and also possibly attract other jobs. I know that some folks from the Economic Development Department had some suggestions of square footages that they would like to see, and that's very much in our purview and something that we hope to tackle between now and Saturday. So we're very much looking at that. So.
Also, all the infill that is along these main streets would be, when we say mixed use, it could be retail below residential, it could be retail below office, it could be office below residential, it could be all office. I mean, there's a lot of room there for variations along those things. So whenever you see that orange building, there's another opportunity for hopefully another business that might employ
I just have to
someone.
say, my burning issue is I get really tired of people referring to economic development and then in the next sentence talking about bringing in more retail or making retail more viable. There's got to be other ways of making living here other than being a Starkin artist or an entrepreneur or working for one of the colleges or being in retail. There isn't enough diversity.
Well, and one of the things that we did find out with the square footage is that the city has a very limited, to bring in, especially even like engineering firms or something of that type, any kind of a business that has a number of people, 100 people or so working for it, they need a lot of area on one floor.
Right.
So this becomes a problem because basically what you're looking at in size is something similar to what, I hate to say it, is something like a big box store. It's a lot of square footage. So the problem with Northampton, the challenge, is that you have all these wonderful geographic features that help make the place what it is. I mean, it's gorgeous, it's paradise. But it does limit the areas for that, so there will be careful study in where those things will fit, and that may actually generate where those things end up getting located. I mean, there's a lot of gray area there, but I mean, that is a factor.
One of the things that also that we've learned in talking to city officials that there is some thought of trying to develop some extra office space in town in an office park sort of scenario that would be south of town along Route 10 going towards East Hampton. And so that's one area that we're sort of aware of, and possibly if we have time, we'd like to look at how to make that work in as good way as possible. So,
let's maybe get around to people who haven't said anything.
Have lots of very good ideas, some of them very local and small, and some of them much more important. The really big idea seems to me to be the Route 66 idea. It can have a really long-lasting impact. It's hard to think about because it's big and expensive and disruptive, but so is the new development on Hospital Hill. And I hope that you'll spend a lot of time thinking about the Route 66 idea. And it occurred to a couple of us here that King Street is a place that's got a lot of room for infill and a lot of room for businesses that could attract people in other than retail.
King Street's certainly not a hurry this week.
Probably tomorrow.
King Street is about to become more empty as well.
yeah, we're going to be looking at this.
And, you know, ladies and gentlemen, I've just been advised that it's 9 o'clock. We started late, we went long, but we can stay. You know, we can stay, you know, at least 15 more minutes. You know, if people want to stay, there's been a lot of hands up.
I think there were a couple more questions.
Yeah, well, yes, sir.
I haven't been to these before, so I'm just coming into this. You know, we know the automobile since World War II is this instrument of technology with the highways and the malls. It's done more in suburbia to destroy kind of the neighborhood, the stoop, et cetera, and following Page and others. And the assumption that everybody's going to drive, I guess my concern is that we're still, I mean, that's a premise that I want to question in terms of what you're doing, the assumption that we're still all going to get in our cars and go where we want in this very free enterprise system where we can do whatever we want, whenever we want, without any concern. And if we're really going to be forward thinking, which we're not as we destroyed, and I call it Village Hill, I want you to call it Hospital Hill. You know, you're reinforcing kind of the decimation of history that the development people here want to do. Just like let's cut out Auschwitz and call it a kindergarten or something. Let's cut out a state hospital that people don't want to remember and rename it, right? So that's part of the development that's going on here. But in terms of the car, I want to put out a radical proposal that we close Main Street, that we put out a proposal that our goal is in 10 years to eliminate the automobile downtown and to fast track a plan for major mass transit. I have a problem also with the insular kind of mode orientation that seems to be here, where we're not thinking about Hadley, we're not thinking about Amherst, we're not thinking about Hoyle or Springfield. It's a network, right? And so it seems to me part of the urban design of this community has to be linked at this time in history more than ever to the overall plan and the fact that we can't get to Boston on mass transit. We got to go to Springfield and get on a bus or get on. So I want there to be some option. I would like you folks to come up with some option at least for those of us who don't have cars, right? There's an assumption, a class assumption, because if you study of single mom, I don't know what the numbers are, you might know, but in the reading I've done on welfare and income inequality, that is a major factor that keeps poor women poor, is that they don't have transportation. We don't have a whole lot of many more poor women in this country, in this community, because of gentrification. You know, I don't know what the numbers are, and I don't know whether you have the demographics on income inequality in this community, but I would just like there to be a plan here for us to be a tremendous leader in this community and in the state for fast-tracking mass transit. You know, I'll just, you know, the idea, I don't want to go to the Cape anymore because of the driving, and I don't want to, there should be, right, mass transit that takes us all the way there, and mass transit on the Cape, so all these cars that have taken it over, it's ridiculous. And the same thing, I was working down in Springfield, and I had to get in a car every day to go down there instead of having some good mass transit. So I live right behind the Baptist church, right? I don't want to have that highway going behind, that two highways right over there. You know, and I'd much rather you folks put forward at least an option of what would it look like to begin us initiating in this town, in this region, to the governor, and you know, to our federal legislatures, that we need to do something serious very quickly and stop this madness. Because, you know, in the 40, 60,000 years we've been here as our species, right, this car is this little pish since World War II. So let's realize in historical perspective how minor it is and have some real forward vision. And not just like the automobile and parking, and we're all going to structure our lives around this killer.
Yeah. I'm here.
Thank you, Joel.
Next question.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean,
Certainly, I think
say about that.
I'd say that we're all very aware of the post-carbon realities or schemes that are ahead of us, and I think that that's certainly implicit in all of our schemes, and we're trying to balance that with all the voices within the community. That's certainly something that will be reflected, and we can do a max pedestrian version.
It could be a 75-year plan or a 100-year. You know what I mean?
Well,
it could just be phasing.
Yeah, but I mean, let me just, you know, let me try to put something in perspective. We're first of all, we're in favor of mass transit. You know, there are, so we are told, and we have every reason to believe, there are budget issues with respect to mass transit and the willingness of citizens to allow themselves to be taxed or tax themselves to create the revenues that would create that. That seems to be a fact that exists independently of what we would like to do. But I want to say that there's nothing that we're proposing. I mean, the notion of walkability, right? It means two things. One, it means people are able to walk the things that they need to do, and it means it can, for the moment, coexist with cars. Right? Walkability does not mean no cars, but it does mean if cars go away, it's still a walkable environment, and that, I would contend, is a big improvement over the way we've been developing over the last 60 years. And so, you know, I have to say that the approach that we take, in a certain sense, is incremental, right? I mean, we're trying to balance, you know, some notion of the idea of the walkability and livability of places within pedestrian proximity, where what we've said is that the neighborhood is the basic unit of urban design. I think I want to say that the neighborhood is not typically sufficient to meet every human need, and that, in fact, there is a need for neighborhoods to communicate with each other, for cities to, you know, to act in concert for regional kinds of interest, including transportation. So I am, and I'm sure the students are completely on board with all of that. I think that the most, you know, our sense is the most helpful thing that we can do is to make the kinds of proposals that will tend in this direction toward more local agriculture, more local business, more walkability. We're certainly in favor of this kind of connectivity that you're suggesting. I think that, again, the issue, and again, we don't have a decision made about proposing this, you know, we're just throwing the idea out about connecting Route 66, but certainly even the kinds of streets that we're trying to make, we're not trying to make arterials that go, you know, 45 miles an hour through town. I mean, we've talked in our presentations about avenues and boulevards and streets. We've talked about hierarchy of street types. We've talked about the characteristic of street types in general, even if they carry high volumes of traffic, that they be pedestrian friendly, right? And so, you know, we're with you. We're with you on a lot of these things, but But I think that the sort of the impetus for how radically this happens, to some extent, it comes from the community. It doesn't come from us.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to what this gentleman was saying as well. What Professor Bess just said about size, I think is the critical, seems to be the critical thing about public transportation. Every time we raise the issue of public transportation around here, somebody says we aren't quite big enough to make it viable. So, well, there used to be trolleys, which would be a great thing. But I'm telling you what we're told now when we say we really need public transportation. And we really do need public transportation. A lot of people really need it.
Because they assume that we're still going to be using cars.
That's
and
right.
When we're not using cars, there will be enough people.
But where I want to go with this is, I'm one of the people who sometimes resists growth. And I'm thinking that there are a couple of reasons for growing a little. And these look to me like really nifty models for how we might do that. If we could grow enough to really support public transportation, I think that would be a great plus. And if we could grow this way, that would be an even bigger plus. Another thing of growing a little is, I was here when we had some conversations about the schools. I really don't want to close neighborhood schools. If we could get a little more dense and grow a little more so that kids really could walk to school and we aren't closing our schools, I think that would be a great gain. At some point, I don't expect you to address this tonight, but at some point, I hope that you will help us to think about, I know you're interested in form-based zoning and that we are very use-based zoning here, and we haven't had total success with it.
With use-based or with use-based?
With use-based. So I hope that you will help us to understand how, by using the right kind of zoning, we can help to make some of these things actually happen. So thank you for what you're doing.
Amen.
Yes.
Yes, just actually following up on that, I think when we were talking about zoning, I think in your packet we're talking about zoning based on building type, rather than use.
Yeah.
And there could be a mix of uses. And I think we have a real crisis in the city now with rental housing. So I think even when you were talking this afternoon, feeling like with gentrification that it might be something that might not be a bad thing. But I think there's a consensus in the communities that we don't want people of moderate income to be driven out of the community. And I think what we really do, I think, design is the profession that really has the tools to determine and say, what the best use is. And rather than say a mortuary or an office that you suggested would, could fit into what was a residential building, I think urban design should be able to say, this is an area where there should be rental housing. And I think Melinda, talked about moving Route 66 and then saying, well, this is an area here where people want to live. And that's right, because people who rent, are people who have, modest income, less income, they need to be downtown. They need to access basic services. They're willing to pay higher prices at a grocery store downtown because they don't have a car to move out, which really supports downtown business. So if someone downtown probably spends as much downtown as someone who has 4 times the income that lives 2 miles away. They'll go somewhere for cheaper or whatever. But I think, what is really critical is that we get a And so I think we need your help or help from the design profession to say that these are areas, and you can really look at traditional areas where people have chosen to live. We'll say, well, I like living in this, I can only rent, I can't buy, I like living in this neighborhood because it's close to the little library. And you get homogenous groups of people who are essentially saying the same thing. My neighborhood, Green West Street neighborhood, that's pretty much it. Quiet neighborhoods, close to the library, and that provides a community. We have people who share interests, stronger community. On the other side of Smith College are people who have means. They don't want to live in my neighborhood because it's too close to downtown. It's probably noisier. It's too dense. They want to have a garden. They want to have those things, and they're a homogenous community too. It's okay that we have homogenous communities because we have a center downtown where we interact and come to design forums or stand in line for ice cream or something like that. So we have an opportunity for an ideal community, but we're designing that.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question about in Chicago, and my sense is that to some extent this is true in Boston, but I don't know. But in Chicago, one of the most common housing types in Chicago is the two-flat. Sometimes the three-flat. And it seems to me that the three-flat probably has its analog of the triple-decker in Boston. And I don't know what the practice is in Boston. But in Chicago, customarily, the two-flat was something that you buy and you rent. You rent the upper unit. You pay the mortgage, provide the kind of affordable housing. And so you get this mix in neighborhoods of owner-occupied homes and rental units. Is that common?
Well, not as much as having somebody, there are a few people in real estate who have 6 unit, 10 unit, those are more common. And these, landlords are actually been very beneficial. They buy more of these, the renters pay the mortgage. There's no need for them to increase the rent because they feel like, well, you've been here for a long time. The mortgage is paid, you pay for the maintenance of the building. And these buildings, talk a little bit about saving durable buildings, but within every neighborhood, some are durable buildings, but some buildings are not so durable. But it's really the zone that's important.
Right.
If you should be able to say, okay, well, we'll save this building, or this building can last. This building may not last. Eventually, we'll tear it down, but we want to say that this is
the kind of housing. Yeah. Well, see, because here's what I'm getting at is that the kind of document, we'll in the end we'll produce proposals for how development can take place in Northampton. We'll designate areas. Probably, if we do a form-based code, then we'll designate areas according to building types and according to density. Most likely, it's going to be more dense downtown, probably less dense at the periphery. Probably, out in Florence and Leeds and Bay State, probably identify certain areas there that we would suggest should be developed more densely, in the center than in the periphery. And what we'll do is we'll identify or suggest a certain number of building types that are allowed to be built there, right? And I need to emphasize that's about all that we can do as architects. Now, once that's done, and presuming that there's it's adopted and that there's a legal thing and there's a consensus in the community those are the kinds of buildings we're going to allow. Typically, it comes from the private sector, some choice to develop that, some sense of whether there's a market, and so there's a short of becoming entrepreneurs and developers ourselves, architects. That's kind of the extent of what architects do and the extent of what urban designers do. Now, one of the things that we actually try to do at Notre is encourage our students to think about being entrepreneurs and developers, but this is it's a young person's game. So.
Just one quick interject.
Make one quick comment before, we were sort of reminded by the comments about regional transportation a few minutes ago, that we made one important omission when we were talking about our downtown plans, which is that we've been told that the railroad that goes across Main Street, which currently carries freight cars, there are plans afoot to to include in the future passenger rail service through Northampton. And bearing that in mind, our plans anticipate some sort of rail passenger station right downtown. So I wanted to make it clear that we are thinking about committed to talk about that.
Everybody here has a valid point, and I understand what this young lady here is saying. Northampton is rare in itself, and it's still a thriving community. I know you guys toured Holyoke, right? Did you take a tour of Holyoke? Yeah, well, you see how dying that city is, where all the buildings are gone, there's no businesses there. We're in a unique position right here in Northampton, where even though because of the economy and recession and things are happening, we still have a striving city life here. And the availability of the walking distance and all this other stuff is this is a prime candidate for what you're trying to do, which is understandable. The issue that I have here is that, like this man was saying though, you know, people are being driven out right now because of the job market, which is understandable, you know. That's what I was saying yesterday when I went off. I have a problem with my anger, and I apologize to everybody that was here that's seen me go off, you know. But I have a problem with my anger I'm trying to control because I see certain things and I don't see why people don't see things the way I see it, you know. To me, it's an easy solution to these problems, you know. There's chances here that we could be in a unique position where we could be the example to other communities. It's just that we all have to come together, you know. People are flocking here because of what they have and what they offer, you know. I think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable to see the mentally ill, the homeless, all these other street peddlers and all these other people out here. But they have nowhere else to go. They have nowhere else to go, you know. Because we've seen Holyoke, we've seen Spring, we've seen these other communities. You know, here at least people will give them a penny, give them a dime, give them a quarter, give them a dollar. You know, regardless of what they do with the money, you know, at least they're getting that, you know. And I can understand everything that's going on. See, and the thing is, though, this was misleading. This right here is misleading to me because I thought it was totally different. The design thing, the one that was in the Gazette, completely different from what the advocate wrote, you know. So when I came here, I was expecting, you know, maybe you'll hear what I have to say about future jobs, economically, what we can do, combine everything, affordable housing, and all that stuff. Because there is ways and means. Because I see there's all these projects going on, and there's ways and means for everybody to get a share of that. I have documentation of federal funding is going, and state funding is going, you know, and it doesn't need to be like this. Like Joel has said about state hospitals. Those people are either in jail or out there just walking the streets. And it's getting ready to get cold. I was homeless last winter, and I understand when that stuff closes down, you have nowhere to go. You know, and that was my motivation for doing what I was doing. You know, that was my motivation to show the good in these people, because now everybody's not just pieces of trash that you can walk over. You know, and everybody has value. That's why everybody's a shining star in the fire service, and that's my point. You know, and I apologize to everybody in this room because I know I'm on YouTube right now. You know, showing my anger.
I saw the video. You're on YouTube because your point hurt and somebody wanted you to make sure it got hurt. So you got hurt. But I just sort of wanted to support everything that everybody's saying because it sort of harkens back to what people were saying after the hotel decision was made, which was we're a really unusually gifted town in terms of talent and brains and values, and the decisions that end up getting made here don't reflect that. They don't reflect forward thinking. You can always count on Paige and Joel or Jim Lowenthal, who's around, to advocate for fewer and fewer cars, but there's a lot of people behind them who feel the same way. There are always a few people that advocate for more
businesses, and I think that there is the assumption that the future is about growth, the growth economy, and we're facing a different time, friends, and I think that we need to acknowledge that the future is a different animal from what we have grown up living through, and it will impact everything, and it will impact materials used, how we heat existing buildings, how we heat the buildings that you're envisioning, the durability of materials, you've touched on some, the availability of materials. Most of these materials come from all over the world and then are processed in some place and then brought to where they're, we're going to begin to see some dramatic changes. There are communities across the world who are beginning to address head-on the reality of this in explicit terms. They're not crafting around the edges of it and really hoping for the best. They're stating, wow, this is happening. This is unprecedented in human history, and we need to consider how to proceed. We need to consider how to proceed in our town, because the local community is where it's at in terms of a design for a future that has a lot of constraints. And so I want to encourage you to do some of that wrestling and to consider what's going to work. Dmitry Orlov in his writings contrasting the collapse of the Soviet Union with the collapse of the United States right now, encourages us to ask 3 questions about anything, about how we live, how we design our homes, our communities. Is it collapse-proof? If it's not collapse-proof, how can I make it collapse-proof? If I can't make it collapse-proof, how can I live without it? And I encourage us all to ask questions about each of these designs, how we move through our lives. Is it collapse-proof?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll let Scott have the last word, but I'm going to tell you something that I think about, which is you may be familiar with James Howard Kunstler's book, The Law of Emergency, in which he describes a scenario, of what it would be like to live in live after peak oil, the end of the oil-based economy, the petroleum-based economy, and all of those things that you describe with respect to the necessity of local agriculture, the end of materials, building materials being transported from all over the world, the necessity to use local materials. I mean, in a certain sense, it's not unprecedented in human history. It's what human settlements were like prior to the advent of the Industrial Revolution. Right? So that if Kunstler's scenario is correct, and I emphasize if, because we may well be, at peak oil. If not now, then we're approaching it. So that's a very plausible kind of scenario to me. But one of the things that he points out in that is that the population of the planet, the human population of the planet, prior to peak oil was about 1 billion people. Now it's about 7 billion people. Right? So that the petroleum-based economy, arguably, is one of the things. And I don't know, it may not be the only factor, it may not even be the most important factor, but arguably it's one of the things that has enabled the planet to support 7 billion people. And maybe not so well, but if the end of the petroleum age means a contraction, right, of the population from 7 billion to 1 billion, that's going to create an awful lot of difficulty. It's going to create an awful lot of difficulty, especially for the poorest and most vulnerable among us. And so one of the things that I think about is how do we create human settlements that are as as is possible. Because in the, if it comes down to a war of, of attrition where, 83% of the population is going to die off, the haves are in a whole lot better position than the have-nots. And, one of the things that is true about city life, historically, is that it includes all classes of people. And so, I'm trying to balance all these things. I mean, I worry about, I can imagine the end of the petroleum-based economy, but it has an upside and downside. I'm all for, kind of self-limitation in what we do. I'm all for making sustainable environments. There's a certain quality of life, though, to that. It's not just a subsistence thing. It's a good thing. In these kinds of environments, communities, people really depend upon each other, and they are communal. So there's an upside, to this. But there's also, I think, a danger of romanticizing this catastrophe that we're heading toward. And if it's really a catastrophe, it's catastrophic. And so, I think we're trying as best we can in this situation, and I think in the way we think about things in Notre Dame, to be good stewards, to love our neighbors, right? To think about, everybody that we meet as our neighbor. And so I'd like to just make that point that we're trying to do that. So,
well, I appreciate that you brought up the word initial collapse, right? And it reminded me of Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, where he begins with, what was on the mind of the last inhabitant of Easter Island when they cut down the last tree. And when he surveys 12 civilizations, he looks at the ones that failed, those that survived, and one of the issues of those that failed was a lack of accountability by those at the top with the decisions of those at the bottom, and also the increasing polarity in those communities. And I think one of the things that we've spoken to here is providing opportunities for everyone and providing increasing options for housing. That was the first point. The second point quickly is I would posit that every single piece of these buildings here in Bruges came within 5 to 10 miles of Bruges. And that the model is not unprecedented for post-carbon future. We've already gone through this before. I completely agree that the idea that the car has just been a sliver of our timeline, and that there are a lot of solutions that we're suggesting that are consonant with themes that we've gone through before in humanity that are, taking advantage of the best practices with these materials that are natural, local, and buildable. And I think there's nothing that we're suggesting that's out of touch with that. And that's just to follow up with what you mentioned last night about the idea that we need to have an adult discussion and not necessarily talk about beauty. I would posit that when human settlement patterns are consonant with nature, that is beautiful, and that there should not be a disconnect there, and so that everything that we're suggesting, when we mention beauty, we're speaking about how we can support and live with nature, and how that this is a beautiful community, and I think it is an opportunity to become even more beautiful. But nothing that we're suggesting is out of line with that. But just to say that we're very much aware of these issues and that they're operating at an implicit, if not an explicit level in our options.
All right, last word, and then we're...
I just think it would be very nice if you could consider something akin to that community housing right here in town, and maybe 1 or 2 or more developments even.
Certainly. Yeah. You know what? Yeah.
Lucky me. I'm just going to say that I appreciate all the work that you all have put in and your willingness to come and to be open to all diverse viewpoints and to listen to them and reflect back. To wrap up, what I've heard here tonight is that it seems like a good portion of people in this room, at least most of the people who have been talking, view a future in which Northampton is a self-sustaining community. And there's a question of what size does that community need to be in order to sustain itself. So if you think of Northampton as a city-state, does it need to be 30,000 people or 50,000 people? How dense do they need to be? What's their relationship going to be to Hadley, which has some of the best farmland in the country, and Holyoke, and Amherst, and Springfield? So I hope that we can see some of that.
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, we are, thanks for coming. We, tomorrow, have a session scheduled for 1:30 to 2:30, a session, if any of you want to stop by. It's going to be probably a smaller group with some sort of in-progress project or piece of work. There's at least a couple of projects that a couple of areas of the spend some time looking at tomorrow. In addition, whether it's tomorrow or Friday, sometime before Saturday, there'll be additional thoughts on the work that was presented tonight and in responding to some of the comments about that work. And so the process will continue, but the idea is